Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for day 3 of Athena, our winter Athena event that we're doing. My name is Jess, and I'm hosting today, giving Alex a bit of a break. I'm the sales lead here at Showcode, and today we're going to be talking about the road to inclusion. So I'm joined by Baiba and Isaac, but I will let them introduce themselves because they can do a much better job of it than I can. So Baiba, if you wanted to start off with your introduction.
Yeah, sure. And hello, everyone. So my name is Baiba Žiga, and I am the founder and CEO of Lake House Consulting. So I have spent the past nearly a decade in large corporations. So during the pandemic, I pivoted and have moved into being a business owner, an entrepreneur myself. And through the consulting, I work with organizations, big and large, big and small, in Europe, in Americas, in the UK, on anything and everything cultural transformation, of which diversity, inclusion, and equity is at the very, very core of it. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Perfect, thank you. And Isaac, Wheels and Wheelchairs, let's hear from you.
Yes, so hello, my name's Isaac Harvey. I have a disability called limb pelvic hypoplasia, which means I have no arms and short legs, but this hasn't stopped me from doing things in life to the fullest. I'm the president of an outdoor activity sports club called Wheels and Wheelchairs, which is where roller skaters and rollerbladers push wheelchair users. We meet on a weekly basis in London. On top of that, I'm also a video editor, a peer facilitator for people with disabilities and mental health conditions, and I have my feet in many other pies, so they may come up in this conversation today. And thank you for having me.
No worries at all, no worries. And anyone watching, if you do have any questions or sort of points of discussion or things you'd like to add to the conversation, you can just put that in the chat. We'll cover some of it as we go, some we may leave to the end, but please feel free to get as engaged with the conversation as you wish, or otherwise just sit there with a cup of tea and enjoy the chat. So let's strip it right back as a starting point. So this whole session is about the road to inclusion. So I think it's good to just start with, what is inclusion? This is obviously a term that is being used a lot at the moment. So Baiba, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, totally. And thank you for the question. And I think often it is missed in conversations, and we go straight to action or straight to producing output. But it is important to understanding what the word actually means. And in its absolute basic form, in Oxford Dictionary, you will find that inclusion is an action or a state of including or of being included within a group or a structure. So, but in terms of, or in the context of today's conversation, we can expand that definition a little bit and talk about that it is an action or practice of providing equal access to opportunities, resources, spaces for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. And, this talks, whatever it might be, excluded because of gender, of ability or disability level, because they are part of an ethnic community or religious group. So those would be sort of quite dry definitions of what that is. But I would like to personally take it probably a step further and say that inclusion is a human right. And the aim of inclusion is to embrace all people, irrespective of their ethnic heritage, gender, like I said, ability, disability, age, or any other social identity or construct. So it is about ensuring equal access, again, to opportunities, resources, spaces, and eliminating discrimination, intolerance, or in other words, removing the barriers that exclude some people, and in cases exclude whole communities in participating in be it professional or social life. So once again, from my perspective, inclusion is a human right.
I really like that. It's a really, really good way of putting it, and I think a good way of understanding it for those who are probably using it in the day-to-day, but maybe not understand fully exactly what it all means. So I don't know, Isaac, do you have anything to add to that at all from your perspective?
Yeah, so I totally agree that it is a human right. Me growing up with a disability, I've had to rely on inclusion so I can be able to do things in life. This can go from growing up in school and having support to be able to be included in lessons and to be able to write things down, to having access into the school. And that can go even further from the transport to get me into school, because I needed a accessible bus to get me to school. And yeah, I've just kind of had to rely on inclusion, so I have been able to participate in all of the things that I have been doing. And it can be quite difficult at times, when I go and use the tube and like lifts are not accessible, like that's not allowing me to be included. And yeah, it's just, yeah, with the disability, it's I've learned a lot about inclusion and being with different disability groups. It's having that awareness of the importance of inclusion.
No, definitely, and it's sort of touching on that with the tubes. It does surprise me how little stations in London are not accessible still, considering the amount of updates that have been done in recent years to the tube line. So I can only imagine see the difficulties that can create trying to get places.
Yeah.
So going further with in terms of inclusion and why it's so important, and it's obviously becoming a real focus for organizations. Obviously, we do a lot of work with companies on this. Why do you think organizations are now taking much more notice of this right now? And do you think that organizations are doing enough, or can more be done?
I think we have definitely come a long way when it has come to inclusion. From my perspective, again, from disability point of view, in London, when we had the Paralympic Games and the Olympic Games, there was that big awareness that we need to really make things more accessible for people, and even like access to the stadium and being able to participate and watch the Paralympic Games. So there was that huge awareness, which I do feel helped London continue to grow. But we still have a long way to go, as we mentioned earlier. Like, not all stations are accessible. Not all buildings have the right access for me to get into places. And I've even a couple of weeks ago, I had a really bad experience with the tube, and a lift not working meant I had to wait for 2 hours to get a cab to the station. So yeah, we have a long way to go, but we have come a long way too.
I'll have to agree with that. Sorry, Jess.
Oh no, I was just going to say that reflective bit. We've come a long way, but there's still a lot to be done. But no, sorry, Baiba.
No, and I absolutely echo what Isaac has just said, and just to sort of build up on what Isaac just talked about. We talk about inclusive design, and inclusive design is about making places that everyone can use and designing them in a way that affects our ability to move, see, hear, and communicate effectively, both, literally and figuratively speaking. So, this inclusive design aims to, in a way, remove barriers that create this unfair effort and separation to some communities, and enables everyone to participate equally and confidently and independently in all of these activities. But I think even when talking about inclusion in organizations, it is much bigger than that. And in terms of how they think about inclusion within their four walls of an organization, it actually is much bigger than that. And maybe before I go there, I would like to pause for a moment and just make a brief distinction between diversity, inclusion, and equity, as I think it's important for the purpose of this conversation to build a more, whole picture of this work. And in terms of organizations, many organizations begin with diversity when actually they should be beginning and starting with equity and inclusion. And then diversity becomes a byproduct, it becomes an output. And in a way, diversity is an output. Diversity can be an input if we talk about, representation, but that representation and that diversity will never be really unpinned. Its true potential will never be unpinned if we don't have equity and inclusion in place. And so, just to make a very quick distinction, so diversity looks at our differences. Those are those social identities, social constructs. Inclusion is that. It is about that human rights that I mentioned, and the way I look at inclusion as well is through that human rights lens, and not necessarily through the differences, but through the things that actually unite us. So regardless of where we are in the world, regardless of our background, there are certain things that all of us strive for, and those are being safe, providing for ourselves and our families, being respected, valued, heard. So these are, the hygiene factors that need to be in place before we can even start, talking about the business case for inclusion or anything like that. And so inclusion is what maintains that diversity, and without it, employees will simply leave the organization. And whereas equity then takes a little bit further, and it takes into account that not everybody is starting at the same point and at the same level, and it's about removing those barriers, or if there are barriers that can't be removed, then at least making sure that everyone has got the same barriers for entry, rather than some people are more advantaged or disadvantaged than others. And there are a lot of analogies for this. There's this party analogy. You're invited to the party, and then you're invited to the dance, and so on. But a sort of visualization that I like to do when talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity is that if we envision a boardroom or a meeting, and we've got a big table, and we've got people around the table, and that diversity would be that we've got different floating heads around that table that look different. Inclusion would be that the facilitator of that meeting would go around the table to every single person and say, what do you think of this product? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So at the end of the meeting, they could say, well, everyone was heard, everyone was included, everyone had an opportunity to raise their points. Whereas equity in that scenario would be that, okay, so now everyone's spoken, but is everyone's point of view will be taken equally seriously and taken forward. And it's just an analogy, very basic analogy, because I do appreciate that what some of these analogies that often we use when talking about these things, they don't even take into account that or don't talk about who actually don't have access to this meeting, to this particular meeting, or actually even bigger, who doesn't get access to this organization, who can't even apply for jobs in this kind of organization. So actually there's a much bigger picture than to what only happens within this meeting or within these organizational walls. So what I'm trying to say here is that all of these things are interlinked. So it's not just about understanding the concept of each letter, D, E, I, J, B, so J for justice, B for belonging. And organizations right now are actually spending more time in wordsmithing what our new department is going to be called. Is it going to be D and I, DEI, Jedi, DIB, and like I said, your organizations are just spending more time on wordsmithing that than actually engaging in the actual work. But it's all about paying attention to how do these letters or these concepts intersect. How do they complement each other? How do they add value to the organization as a business and its people? And when I talk about people, I don't only talk about employees, it's customers, suppliers, partners, the local community, visitors, and whatnot. So it's a whole ecosystem that we serve and we affect. And again, going back to we have to look broader and wider than just the four walls of the organization. And one more example that I want to give, there's actually a study that talks about heterogeneous and homogeneous teams. Because obviously, organizations want a business case. And like I said, a lot of organizations begin with diversity and about bringing different people in. But actually, there's a study that talks about the fact that actually homogeneous teams perform better than heterogeneous teams. And this might sound controversial because it goes against everything that we've been told in this diversity and inclusion space, that, the more diverse people we get in, the higher the profits, the better the productivity and engagement and so on. But it doesn't begin and end with diversity. This diversity needs to be unpinned, once again, by inclusion and equity. And so the study goes to say that actually, like I said, homogeneous teams perform better unless the only ingredient that unpins where hetero teams absolutely skyrocket in terms of performance is psychological safety. And psychological safety doesn't just happen in diverse, quote unquote, environments. This is where, inclusion comes in. So there's a business case, again, quote unquote business case. I don't necessarily like to use that term, in a sense of productivity, innovation, employee retention, access to better talent, less money spent on sick leaves and days off, less, working days lost. But also from employee point of view, even though, from business point of view, employee engagement is measurable, but it really also benefits employees as individuals from mental well-being point of view. And right now, our organizations are filled with, sick and ill people because people are burnt out, they're stressed, they're anxious. So again, this is where it becomes bigger than the organization, because when these people exit the corporate walls, they still have to walk the world. They still have to engage with their families. They still have to raise their children. And if these people are constantly, chronically stressed, anxious, burnt out, depressed, then we are building a sick and ill humanity, because these ill people then raise the next generation. So you can now see how this evolves and gets bigger than a corporate inclusion policy. So organizations 100% have the very duty and responsibility to engage in this work because it is bigger than them. But equally, they have a huge power in contributing to this in a very positive way. So I'm going to take a bit of a breath here, but but I did want to make a bit of a distinction and talk about how organizations engage in this work from a point of diversity, but actually they will never get those 20% increase in productivity, 30% increase in profit if it is not unpinned by inclusion and equity.
Because actually it's interesting you say about I totally agree about it being the bigger picture. Because all it takes is someone to have a really bad experience, they leave the company, and then they bring that energy to the next company, and then it goes, like, there could be a vicious cycle of it being negative, but also on the other hand, it could be a positive cycle. So someone having a good experience can take it to the next company and say, oh, look, this is what this company was doing. So we should bring it here. And then, if they take it on board, then it'll go on to the next person. So, it's like snowball effect.
Yeah, no, I think definitely that's really good. And you sort of touched on a little bit about the sort of like the bad situations you've dealt with, Isaac, in particular with the tube. Have you had an example where actually you thought this is a really good idea and you wish you saw that more elsewhere?
Well, to be honest, so on the tube, overall, I have really good experiences, and that's thanks to Transport for London and their staff. I can travel all around London independently. So I go to a station, I speak to the staff, and then they help me onto the train, call the station ahead where I'll be met off the train, and then they'll help me to wherever I'm going next. And I think it's just that communication is really good when it comes to TFL. It's very rare that it doesn't work out, and sometimes it does, but that's a bit of human error or miscommunication. But overall, I think that's communication's key in that aspect on having a good experience.
Yeah, that's great. And by sort of just going back to what you were saying, I think, yeah, it's obviously early in the year when we spoke at Athena, and obviously it's very much about inclusion first before obviously diversity. It's great that you've obviously pushed that further, and it's bringing in equity more into the fold, which I think is something that you see D&I mentioned a lot, I&D, but the equity, just from what I've seen, I haven't seen many companies really talk about the equity side of stuff. Would you agree?
100%, yeah, because it's a can of worms. Because when we start talking about equity, we have to talk about pay equity, ethnic pay equity, many other things, and those are not necessarily things that are being required to report. Your gender pay gap is, and it's not required to report just yet, and so organizations are still hiding. They're still hiding, and because they know that they do have a lot of inequities, and but these inequities serve someone, because if they didn't serve someone in power, they wouldn't be there, and that's the sad, part of it.
Okay. Yeah, no, really good point. And I suppose we mentioned TFL there. They do a really good job of being more inclusive. Have you got, between the two of you, any other examples of organisations that have done well or acting on things at the moment and doing a lot to improve their current, how they currently approach it?
So I work at a local charity, and it kind of might have a bit of an advantage as they work with people with disabilities. But since the day one working there, I felt as if I've just been part of the team, and they support me in, when I need to, because I'm a filmmaker, they help me do the filming. I direct them, but they help me with the camera, and they help me with lunch and things. And even before that, I've done voluntary in other places where I would have support, being able to support others, and that has allowed me to do my job basically. And I think charities are quite good at it. I haven't really worked in the corporate world that much, but charities do have it well put out, and I think corporates need to look into what charities are doing to support people like myself to be able to work.
No, that's really nice. Good.
Yeah, charities, NGOs. So I think a lot of organizations that work at grassroots, there are, smaller organizations that are founded by people who are systematically, excluded and underserved, are the ones that are doing the best job with inclusion. Because when it comes to corporate and large organizations, we have to, keep in mind the fact that they've got a lot of legacy that they carry. Organizations, for instance, as your BBC and Netflix, are doing a good job. They're not doing a bad job. They are talking about it. They've got decent strategy in place and so on. But there still are pockets of activity that, when they surface on a mainstream level, both Netflix or BBC, and there are plenty of examples in this year or in recent months alone, where when you look at that example, you're like, I know 100% that there was not one person of color or one person with a disability in that room who made a decision about that product or service.
Okay, nice. Thank you for that. So just thinking, like, sort of with the webinar being titled "The Road to Inclusion," obviously we've covered quite a fair amount in terms of what diversity, inclusion, equity is. But if you're an organisation or you're on your road to inclusion, what does that journey look like, would you say?
As I mentioned earlier about communication and understanding people, and actually talking to people and not assuming what needs to be done. If you don't talk to people, then you don't know. Like, you can't just assume that's how it should be. I know I can't think of an exact example, but I've seen some places where they say it's accessible, but you can tell like they've not spoken to anyone in a wheelchair or anyone like myself, and they just think that's accessible. And when you tell them that it's wrong, it's like, oh gosh, we have to redo it. And it's like, you could have just asked us in the first place, and you wouldn't have had to have wasted so much money to then redo it. Because there are people out there to talk to. It's just that they have to reach out to us. And we don't know if it's a problem if you don't tell us as well. So yeah, I think communication is, for me, a really important part to the road to inclusion.
Yeah, and that's where I think going back on that point you were saying, where the charities really can support corporates, because if a corporate was to reach out and say, look, we really want to do this, what are the first steps to help us, you'd be so open, which maybe on the flip side, corporates maybe aren't as open with their communication, which may be an issue on the corporate side. Baiba, have you got anything in terms, so we said communication, what would you add to that?
I mean, I agree. Just before I go there, I just want to, echo what Isaac was just talking about, that there is not enough communication, not enough engagement between the organizations and charities or NGOs or any other organization at grassroots level, who can fundamentally help with this. And this is where I was talking about, when something, a new product or whatever, comes to a surface level, exactly that there are no, that is supposed to even serve, people with accessibility needs, that there hasn't been one person with accessibility needs in that boardroom, meeting room, product team, test team, project team, to at any point during that long process to say, wait a second. And this is also a conversation that I had with Molly Watt, who has got an Usher syndrome, so she's deaf blind. I had a conversation with her last year on a podcast episode. So if anyone who's interested, is 21st Century Change Agent is episode number 2, and I spoke to Molly, and some of the work that she's doing is actually organizations are bringing her in when they are testing or designing accessibility, let's say plugins or whatever it might be. And she said that, so for instance, myself, let's say I don't have any disability, and I go on a website and I see a plugin in the corner that says, accessibility, and I'm like, oh, this organization has thought about it. This organization is doing good, right? But then, Molly would say half of them don't work. Half of them don't work. Half of them don't serve, people like her. And so I would, let's say, I'm going to, apply for a job for this organization because they clearly have thought about it. So they definitely are inclusive, but I'm not using that plugin. So I'm judging their ability to serve that community at a face value. And so, but another, point I want to make is that, disabilities, 1 in 4 people in the UK has got a disability, whether we talk about physical disability, neurodiversity, whatever it might be. And so it makes, so the people with disabilities the largest minority group, if I can refer to them that way, in an organization. Yet, according to statistics and different surveys, that is the last thing that is being thought about in an organizational context, because a lot of people talk about and think about the gender parity. They think about, obviously, since last year, Black Lives Matter movement, there's a lot of conversation around systematic racism, serving LGBT communities, but disability or accessibility always becomes sort of like, I'll talk about it in phase 2. And this is really interesting that I say that, because this week alone I had a conversation with someone who are designing a new product, and I was talking about there has to be accessibility by design into it, and they said, we will think about it on phase 2, right? So you're at a phase ground zero when you're designing something, but you're saying, well, accessibility, we'll think about it later, because it's more about getting it pretty and getting it out. So that's that's the mindset. And going back to what Isaac was saying about again, not necessarily only people with disabilities, but people with those lived experiences not being included in decision making. My brother is in a wheelchair as well, and I was telling this story to Isaac a couple of weeks ago. Is that so he lives by a river. So for him to get, he lives in Latvia, first and foremost. He lives by a river. So for him to get into the city, if he ever needs to get anywhere, he needs to cross the bridge. And that bridge is just, outside his house ultimately. So recently, the local council did a good job, because previously that bridge from my childhood, when I used to walk over that bridge twice a day, going to school and back, a kind of a bridge that you would see in like, Indiana Jones movies, right? With ropes and boards and all sorts of things, that kind of bridge, right? So there's like zero accessibility. And so they redid that bridge into an accessible bridge where you can access it with wheelchairs, with prams, with bicycles, with whatever. But what they didn't do, because their project was build a bridge, we are done. What they didn't do is actually build an accessible road to get to that bridge. So my brother has got this bridge where he can get across the river, but he can't actually access that bridge because there's no way of accessing it. And this is what I'm talking about. When you have one job, you only do that one job and you never look at the bigger picture. And this is where it becomes bonkers. But anyway, so that's just to build upon a little bit what Isaac was saying. But to answer your initial question about, apart from communication, what are some of the other things that organizations can do? 100%, communication is key. But I think in this work, or rather, and in this work, the foundations and fundamentals are everything. And we have to start with fundamentals and go back to basics and foundations before we start producing outputs. And one of those things is recognizing that first and foremost, inclusion, equity, or this work in general is not a job of a single department or a team, or God forbid, a single person in HR people team or DEI team. It should be part of everyone's job description, be it at a service assistant level to executive level, middle management, whatever it is. This should be part of everyone's job description. Diversity and inclusion should never be another thing that we have to do, another training session that we have to attend. It should be all the very core of everything. Once again, there shouldn't be management training and then diverse management training. It should be all the same thing. It should be, wrapped into the very core of it. As mentioned earlier as well, it begins with inputs. Mm-hmm. So organizations need to do their homework. They need to do audits. They need to do surveys. They need to have conversations. They have to pledge commitment with specific measures and specifically accountability measures in place. Because you can't just buy a gender blind, CV sifting system and be done with this, or make a one-off unconscious bias training compulsory for everyone and be done with this. And whenever I hear, an organization telling me that this is that one and only thing that they've done in the past 12 months, I roll my eyes hard. Because we are way past raising awareness. We are way past raising awareness, and we should be in action state. And my pledge to myself in terms of how I work with my clients in 2022, it's all going to be about action. We are way past awareness raising stages.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think there's been a lot of discussions. Let's now see it materialize. Going back on just sort of like things that I've picked up through the conversation we're having. Obviously, we've talked about organizations that are doing good, or what more can organizations do. But it seems like projects that have been done to, like you were saying, Isaac, like offices say that, it's wheelchair accessible, and you go there and it's not accessible. This is probably I don't know that much of how these things are regulated. Like, if someone says that they've got wheelchair access, is there anyone actually going along and saying yes, that's fine, that would be able, you are now accessible? Or is it basically companies are giving free rein to say they're accessible? Or I just don't know if you two can add anything to that.
I'm pretty sure that, I feel that it should be regulated if it isn't. And people should be testing out these accessibility issues. Because the one thing I just thought about, some places say they have access, but I have to go around the back of the building through probably the bins and the back entrance, and that's an accessible entrance, and that's just not on really, and it's not exactly fair, because everyone else goes through the front and I have to go through the back, and that's actually in most places, and I just don't feel that's really accessible. It's not right for me to have to do something different compared to everyone else. Yes, it's good I can get into the building, but why do I have to go a different way from everyone else?
Yeah.
So yeah, but I hope it is regulated, because I don't know if it is or isn't, but it should be.
Well, yeah, I don't know myself.
That is such a good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying that's such a good point, you know, about the fact that it's not just about saying, you know, we are accessible, but then that experience that you have to go through is just unfair. So they would say, yeah, well, he can get in, so, you know, no one can fine us or say that we are inaccessible, but that experience is just dehumanizing. Whether it's getting into an office or, you know, boarding a plane, or, you know, those processes around it is what makes you more disabled than what you actually are.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because it's making me feel disabling in the world. Because one I've just remembered. I went into the US Embassy to get my ESTA.
Yeah.
And even to get into there, this was the old building, but I had to go through the car park area, down the bottom, through all of these offices, and through the back, while everyone else went up these steps. And yeah, that was a bit like, why do I have to do this? It wasn't a very nice experience, but yeah, it's in many places.
It's touching on that, like, yeah, they're saying they're accessible, but they're not being inclusive, because, as they say, you don't feel included in that situation.
No.
Like, if you're going to somewhere with some friends and then you're told by, I don't know, the security guard or whatever, oh, you need to go around the back, but your friends have to come through the front, like, it just puts such a dampener on the situation. Like, yes, you do eventually, like, a few minutes later you'll probably be like, okay, fine, I'm in now, but you shouldn't be put in that situation where you are separated from your own friends or the situation that you're in just because of a disability.
Well, it just reminds me of that article which came out last week about the COP26 and the Israeli president in the wheelchair couldn't even get into the building to be part of the meeting, and that just blows my mind. But I think it's, you know, it's a lot of people's fault. It's like the UN couldn't even find out if the place was accessible. They shouldn't have chosen that location. There's so many questions that I just couldn't understand, and I thought it was really bad. It's really bad, especially on a large scale as well. And you know, they're just excluding someone to make big decisions for the world, and you know, they can't join in. Just think it's crazy.
Exactly, and I love that you brought that up, because when I saw it, the first question that ran through my mind about that was that, well, first and foremost, you know, at no point during the preparation period there was a question, do you require any reasonable adjustment? Do you have any accessibility needs? So that was non-existent. Let's begin with that. But then the second thing is that these people, you know, Biden, Angela Merkel, you know, all of these big people are in this building in Glasgow, and they are debating about our future, about climate crisis, about what to put in place so we are carbon neutral by 2050, right? Or 2070, whatever it is. So they are planning and debating our future, our children's future, but they can't get today right. They can't get the basics right of getting someone in a wheelchair into the building. So how can you trust these people to with our future? How can you trust them with our future?
I don't know if you saw you probably did the video of Greta Thunberg when she was chanting. Oh, I think I may have lost. Oh, hello. Oh, there we go. I think it's right. Sorry. I think it cut out slightly on my side. But the video of Greta Thunberg, and she's outside COP26 and she did her chant, like, I'm not going to say the exact words because I don't know who's actually tuning into this. And basically just like, you can just shove it, because it's just like, you're making these decisions, but as we're sort of highlighting today, we haven't even got the present day sorted. Like, people are still struggling day to day, and it's a large amount of the population that are struggling. And yeah, it's great that obviously we still want to have a planet to live on in years to come, but we can't even enable people today to be able to support that. Like, I wasn't aware. I've been following COP26, but I didn't see that bit about the Israeli Prime Minister not being able to get into the meeting. That's really like a huge oversight and so discriminatory towards them. Like, what I'm hoping you went outside and joined Greta with her chant.
Because she
literally
she ended up waiting there for 2 hours and then had to go back to her hotel. Yeah, so she didn't even get inside.
That is just awful. No, that is really, really awful. So really good sort of conversation.
But those are, but I just wanted to, add one last thing, is that, that is just to represent, obviously that made the headlines because it was, a representative, a very, high level representative and status person from Israel. But those are experiences for people every day.
Yeah.
Every day, those are experiences for people that don't make the headlines, that no one talks about. And that's why we need to be mindful. 1 in 4 people have got a disability, be it visible or invisible. How are we catering for it?
Yeah.
Because actually someone did ask that question on LinkedIn, how many stories are not told. And I commented saying how many good stories are not even told of people with disabilities and what we are achieving. Because they're missed out as well. The bad and the good are not represented at all. So like, we're not heard either way. Usually bad, but yeah, we should see some good stuff as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And if there's anyone sort of watching this chat at the moment, if you've got any experiences that you've seen companies do good or do bad, or situations, feel free to add it into the chat. We've got a few more questions to go through, but if there's anything, Eleanor, thank you for joining us from Toronto. Lovely to have you. So thank you for getting up so early. So we mentioned there about communication, like input, like having these audits and so on to help on that road to inclusion. In terms of companies both small and large, that's sort of like how it looks like. What are things do you think that can be added in as a step in, like if your company that's first sort of making their step into this, like what would you say they could do more to be inclusive, apart from, like we said, about touching like the communication side and so on? What else could be done?
I will still go back, and echo what I said earlier. It is about basics. It is getting basics right. You can't create any outputs if you don't have the appropriate input. And another input that I didn't mention earlier is about resources. So because I have been part of, belonging and inclusion committees and steering committees and all sorts of things. And I just now in sort of my mind's eye remembering, some of those meetings where we, for instance, were talking about disability. It was crickets. No one knew how to address the conversation and how to talk about it. And so with that, and I'm talking not only, grassroots level people who are in there or who potentially have never faced it. I'm talking all, people from, HR being in there, the executives of the organization being part of that meeting. And so there needs to be better support also in the people who are championing this work. So on one hand, there has to be investment in these D&I advocates, wherever they live, in HR or in a separate department or in different other teams of the organization. There needs to be investment in them, because often these people join the forces to do this work out of passion, or they're parachuted into these roles for all the wrong reasons. Not always, that's the scenario, but we often see that. And so not necessarily these people have the experience and the resources and the knowledge and the tools to confidently champion this work. So there has to be investment in their education. And I'm not talking about, unconscious bias training or anything like that, but a full-on training, resources, access to mentorships, because this work is hard. It is emotionally exhausting. So, and if you imagine that this work is being done by people who are already systematically marginalized and underserved, it's like a punch in the face twice every day, right? And so that's from the grassroots level. But equally, of course, this work equally needs to happen top down. And there's a lot of work that executives need to do in terms of supporting, championing, sponsoring, advocating for this work. However, also these people need support so they can confidently talk about it. So they need coaching, is what I would say they need. They need coaching to be able to show up as the leaders that this world needs, to be able to engage with their communities they serve in an empowering and compassionate manner, to make sure that through their incompetence or ignorance, they don't create more harm that already is there. So investment in their education, upskilling resources is absolutely huge.
Perfect.
And that's what, you know, and I'm going to make a quick plug in here as well, because that's also one of the things where I personally am moving away from some of that work that I'm doing in large corporations and large organizations all around, because I have also realized that me going in there, delivering something, be it foundations or anything else, and then handing it over to someone else within the organization, it not necessarily always works, because that person who I might be handing it over to don't have, you know, the basic skills or knowledge to be able, or confidence to be able to drive that work. And I can't make an impact that I want to see in our collective consciousness and the humanity by walking into one organization at a time all year round. So one of the things that I'm developing, and I've been speaking to Isaac about it as well, is this DI accelerator, in which I put all of my, you know, years of knowledge, all of the resources that I acquired over the years, you know, opening up my toolbox and offering it to my colleagues in internal teams. So they are able to drive and champion this work and do this work and execute this work from within. Because often, you know, yes, there are times when, you know, experts or consultants need to be brought in, but we are often being brought in to do basics that their internal teams should be able to do, but they don't have the skills and capability to do it. So you know, going forward in 2022, my vision and my life's work will be serving my colleagues who are in these spaces.
Oh, that sounds really, really interesting. The DI accelerator. It's almost like, springs to mind. It's like, obviously you've always had your first aid trainers that get trained up so they can do first aid and try and save a life. This will be D&I, like how can we make sure we're more accessible, more inclusive, and making sure we're doing the right things properly, rather than a tick box exercise to say, well, we had someone in, it went well, perfect, that's it, done then. And it's like, no, that's not it done. This is forever. So no, I think that's really, really great, and would love to support you with that. That's being pushed out.
Thank you.
Was there anything more you had to add to that, Isaac, before? I think we've got one more question or so to go through.
Yeah, I feel it's one thing that, you know, organizations need to realize is there are resources out there if you go and look for it. And there's a lot of free resources as well, which are very in-depth and can teach you a lot of things. And how I mentioned earlier, there's people like me and Baiba who are willing to speak to you about it, because, you know, we're here to help you. And if you don't talk to us, then, you know, we don't know, and you won't get better. So I think it's just realizing that there are resources out there, and the D&I accelerator again is coming. Another plug. But yeah, there's loads of people to talk to about these things. And to answer the initial question, it's as soon as you walk through the door, new employees, old employees, you know, this should just be it from day one, and people should have the understanding of DEI from the beginning. And how you mentioned Baiba, how it needs to be implemented in everything, because it just has to be, and it's a continuous thing. It's not a one-off. It's a continuous thing throughout.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, the communication part, as you mentioned there again, really it seems to be a consistent messaging we're getting out there. So we've got one sort of more question before our hour has almost come to an end. So it's we've got the question here. So is there a key to maintaining inclusivity, or should it be natural for an organisation that is genuinely inclusive?
Say the question again, please.
So it's basically saying, is there a key to maintaining inclusivity, or should it be natural for an organisation that is already sort of genuinely inclusive? So basically, I think it's just the question's trying to get at the point of how can companies maintain their inclusivity in terms of like ones that maybe weren't before and are now starting to be more inclusive, or in terms of other organisations, should it just be a natural thing that people should just start talking about it more and just naturally become more inclusive? I think that's what that question is getting at anyways. Apologies if I got that wrong from where that came from.
I think the key leads on to it into the second question, that it becomes natural once you start implementing it in everything, and it just becomes second nature that this is what we should be doing. Once the conversations start, it's then natural. It's like the subconscious. You just end up doing it without having to think about it. But for that to happen, you have to start the conversation.
The more you do it, the more second nature becomes, as Isaac has just said. And so I think one part of it is accountability. There has to be some sort of accountability in place. There have to be people at all levels everywhere championing it, that we don't allow little comments or little actions to go and be swept under the carpet, that we do address, that we do raise these things, that we do stand up for anything that is that's exclusive, inequitable, or unjust. And the more we do, the more we practice it, the more comfortable we'll get with it. But of course, it as with anything, when we learn a new skill, it is uncomfortable. But we do have to, just trust the process and get through that discomfort, because only through that happens growth. Because, for instance, innovation. What's innovation? Innovation is a product of failure, right? And same with growth. Growth is a product of discomfort. And so we can't be in a comfortable position and do great things. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It may be controversial, so let everyone sit with that, but I truly believe it in.
Yeah, no, so you always hear about you have to be out of your comfort zone in order to do good and move on to the next level. And it'll be interesting to see, I think, in years to come. As we said at the very beginning of the call, we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. But obviously there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of people like yourselves who are more than welcome to help organisations with being more inclusive in their processes and sort of general things, from whether it be just entering the office or entering the building, through to general sort of day-to-day jobs that an employee, for example, may be needing to do. So I don't know if either of you two have anything more to add to that, then please feel free.
I was going to say, I feel that organizations are just scared of getting it wrong, which is why they don't do anything about it. And that's when you have to seek discomfort and think, okay, I might get it wrong, but I'm learning to get better. Because if you don't take a step forward, then you won't go forward. So I think it's just getting out the comfort zone and realizing, look, we're not going to get it right, or maybe we'll get it right, but if you're willing to learn and get better, then you will do.
Yeah, I think
exactly. It's I just wanted to add to that it's diversity, inclusion, whatever we want to label it as. It is not about arriving at a certain destination. It is always work in progress. And even when we've fulfilled our 12 or 3-year plan that we've set to ourselves, we build upon it and we develop and evolve and elevate it again. There's never a destination where you arrive. You keep on evolving, you keep on getting better. It's the same with anything that we do, even for leaders, thought leaders, whatever. You never arrive there. You keep on evolving, you keep on learning more, you keep on upskilling yourself, side skilling yourself, whatever it might be. And what Isaac was saying about, where organizations are afraid, of course they are, because there is this very toxic cancel culture that is out there. And so a lot of leaders choose not to do or not to say anything out of fear of being cancelled. And I fundamentally disagree with that. And I think we shouldn't have, such culture, and everyone should have the opportunity to get it wrong, but learn from it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've noticed a lot recently. Is it Tesco's I saw have started doing like quiet shopping hours for those who obviously for like kids who obviously can't handle loud noises and so on, which I thought was a really good initiative. I don't know if they've done it across all of their stores, but I saw it being promoted. There's a lady I know whose kid doesn't react well to loud noises, and it made shopping a very stressful experience for her. But so she really wanted to promote that, what they were doing differently to make her life a little bit easier and her son's life even more easier, so they can have a much more relaxed time doing a food shop, which is nice because we take that forward. You can take that forward. You just think, oh, it's a food shop, but you don't think of other people that's quite a big thing for them and can be quite a nerve-wracking thing. So I thought it was really lovely to see that they have introduced something like that to help those that unfortunately that it is a stressful time otherwise, just getting your local weekly shop.
Yeah, I've heard that it's for people with autism mainly, who are not prone to loud noises.
Yeah, no, it's really good to see that. So if there was any other points you wanted to make, guys, then please feel free. Otherwise, we've sort of wrapped up the questions. I can't see anything in particular in the chat. Eleanor, obviously loved your mention of the phase 2 approach earlier, Baiba, which definitely was really good. But yeah, I think the main point, I've been making some notes as well throughout the conversation. Really loved obviously the initial point of inclusion as a human right, and I think if you can get that ingrained in people's heads, it makes that messaging really, really strong and easy to understand as well. Everyone knows what a human right is. It's then just making sure that then everything's being done to action that. So yeah, Baiba, Isaac, if there's anything you wanted to add, please feel free. Otherwise, we will wrap the session up.
Just to say thank you for allowing this space. I really enjoyed this conversation with both of you. And Isaac, thank you for joining me here. Really loved learning from your experiences and hearing those experiences that you've been through. Not necessarily love the experiences, but thank you for sharing them with us here today, and hopefully they will resonate to some of the people here today as well.
And likewise for inviting me to be on this platform and to be able to share my experience with people to have a better understanding, and hopefully use this knowledge into your workplace, and we've got to keep the conversation going to keep on making changes. So we'll do this again same time next week.
Definitely.
We should maybe that will do the trick.
Make it a weekly session. No, definitely, I'd love that. And especially guys, the DI Accelerator, do let me know once you are ready to release that to the world. Would love to get that out there, because I think we've got your first aiders, we've got your mental health ambassadors, but no one's really addressing how we can do more to really boost, keep this conversation going, as we're saying. And I think that can really, really help a lot of organisations and people that want to do more in that space. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. Lovely having you both. Thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, looking forward to the other sessions we've got leading up to the hack this weekend. So thank you very much. We'll speak to you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.